So the good news is if you're watching this, then you've probably gotten an offer from a publisher. Congratulations. The bad news is you're probably realizing right about now that I'm not a lawyer. And while I can't give you legal advice, I can give you some things to think about and to take into that negotiation to help you get a better deal. My first piece of advice is have a lawyer review your contract. It's worth a couple $100. When we were signing deals at Armor, we always encouraged our developers to go out and speak to a lawyer because we always viewed contracts not as something to win, but that's something everyone was going to hopefully agree upon and then never talk about again. So we wanted to get all of that stuff out in the open. We wanted to have a lawyer pick it apart so that the developer would confidently enter into that contract with us. If you can find one, it's extremely valuable to have an attorney who has experience in the games industry specifically, because there are some things in contracts that might look a little iffy, but that turn out to be actually quite favorable relative to other contracts in the industry. Recoup and Rev-Share, these are big ticket items in any developer publisher contract. The type of Rev-Share I want to talk about today is the split model. So just to have numbers to talk about in our example, let's say you agree that you will get 70% and the publisher will get 30%. And let's say they invested $100,000 in your game. Under the most basic contracts, the publisher will keep 100% of the first 100,000 in order to get their money back. After they've recouped their investment, then you start earning that 70%. In the split model, you might get 10 or 15% immediately on all sales while you're still recouping. And then after the publisher gets their money back, the contract reverts to the original 70-30 terms. The reason I like this is because if the developer is able to get paid as soon as sales start coming in, they'll be more engaged in the product, they'll be able to respond to the community, fix bugs, add features, which gives the game a better chance of earning better reviews, it'll give the game a longer tail. And yes, the game will recoup a little bit more slowly, but the money that goes to fund the developer supporting the game and the community is going to be better for everyone in the long term. Breach of contract is a big one that comes up in these conversations, and most commonly this comes up around a developer failing to meet a milestone. So one, you're going to want to understand what constitutes breach. This is going to mean understanding how and when a publisher expects the developer to deliver on a milestone, what the criteria and process for getting those approved is, and then understanding what will happen if you fail to meet that criteria. First of all, there's often a grace period, and if there isn't, you should ask about one. So if, for example, you owe something on January 1st, and you don't deliver until January 2nd, you don't want to be immediately in breach the day after. And that's probably not going to be the case, but this is why you should look over the contract, why you should have a lawyer look over the contract. Beyond that, if the developer still fails to meet the milestone, what then happens? Does it go to arbitration? Can parties start suing each other? Objection! And in worst case scenarios, is the publisher going to own your IP? Those things exist in the contract to define what happens in the worst case event, but you should bear in mind that they're not in there as scare tactics, at least not in the case of a good publisher. They're there if everything else fails. So if you can't get through the grace period, if you can't handle arbitration, if you can't settle things any number of ways, then how do we solve this? It's a good idea to talk through these scenarios with a publisher before you sign anything. Make sure you understand what you're agreeing to and that you believe these terms are fair. And then once you've signed the contract, be communicative. Tell them ahead of time if you're getting behind. You shouldn't be focused on not getting in trouble per the contract. You should be focused on working together so that the contract never has to come up. And in my experience, it almost never has to. Sequels often come up when discussing terms with a publisher. Some publishers will require rights to a sequel to the game that you're working on. Why do publishers ask for sequel rights? Well, from their perspective, if they invest a ton of money and take on risk for you to develop an engine and potentially an IP that goes on to be very successful, you might then take that engine, take that IP that they nurtured, and go off and make a ton of money without them. And I'm not saying publishers are due the rights to your sequel. That's just the thought process that they're going through. I much prefer a scenario where the publisher does such a good job that the developer just naturally wants to come back. They don't have to be forced to do so. If the publisher is pushing hard on rights to a sequel, one, you need to understand what constitutes a sequel. If you look at the Steam World games as an example, those games all exist with the same characters in the same universe, but most of those games are not necessarily a sequel to another. Definitely define what constitutes a sequel, and if they're pushing extra hard on it, a middle ground might be to offer first rights of refusal. This means that you have to come to them first with the sequel and give them an opportunity to make an offer. You're not required to accept that offer, but you are required to listen to it. The term of the contract is another thing that comes up often. A lot of publishers will have perpetual rights written into their boilerplate contract, which means you're licensing them the right to sell your game in perpetuity. Some developers don't want to be locked in forever. This tends to be based on where you see you and your studio 3, 5, 10 years down the line. If you want to focus just on your game and don't want to have to worry about sales and talking to Humble and finding new platforms and getting into Game Pass, it might be the right move for you to sign a perpetual license and let the publisher worry about your back catalog. Alternatively, if you want to be more hands-on as you grow as a developer, you might want to look at negotiating something like a 5-year term. This would mean that the publisher loses their license to sell the game on your behalf 5 years after they've recouped their money. Sometimes after that 5-year term is up, the ownership will immediately transfer to the developer, and other times you'll see it go into a yearly auto-renew, which just requires the developer to give written notice prior to one of those renewals if they ever want to terminate the contract. When you're considering terms, think about your 3, 5, and 10-year plans and decide accordingly. Lastly, I've got a couple more quick items for you. You'll want to take a look at how the publisher is claiming rights to future platforms. So if you're launching on current generation consoles, are they asking for rights to Switch 2 or PlayStation 6 or other unannounced titles? There's no rule of thumb for rights to unannounced consoles, but it's something you should consider as part of your review. Next, a lot of times you'll see ancillary budgets. So you'll have your development advances, which go towards your rent and food and paying employees and stuff like that. But then often there'll be other budgets like $50,000 for marketing or $20,000 for music and sound effects. You'll want to make sure that those ancillary budgets are set up so that both the publisher and the developer have to agree before dispersing funds from those budgets. I haven't heard any stories of publishers doing this, but if you don't have that mutual agreement clause in there, it's possible the publisher could go out and just, hey, I spent $40,000 on ads on this website without talking to you. Lastly, you want to ask about the timing of payments. Every platform and publisher pays out on a different schedule. You'll hear it referred to as something like net 30, 60, or 90. In the case of Steam, they tend to be around net 30. Steam doesn't pay the publisher until 30 days after they receive funds. The publisher might not pay you for 30 or 60 days until after they receive funds. So even if you recouped on day one, if Steam is net 30 and the publisher is net 30, you're not going to see anything for at least 2 months, which might be fine. It might not be. This again can be why that split rev share model is a good idea to look into, because if you're waiting for the platform to pay you and the publisher to pay you and for recoup to happen, it could be quite a while before you see any money. As I've been saying throughout this entire series, do not lose sight of the fact that you have something of value. If you go into this understanding your value and being willing to walk away, you're either going to settle on a deal that you deserve or allow yourself to walk away from one that you don't. Be confident, good luck, and thank you so much for watching. I'm going to leave a link to my website, baconandgames.com, down below. There you'll find links to submit questions to be answered in future videos, or ways to get in touch with me if you're looking for pitch deck reviews or feedback on your approach to finding a publisher. Please reach out. If I can help you, I'll be happy to do so. As always, be kind to yourself and be kind to others. I will see you in the next video.